Some forms of luck make noise, others bloom in silence. While most people search for wealth through action, negotiation, and noise, ancient Feng Shui tells a softer story, one rooted in color, placement, and the quiet language of petals. A story where energy doesn't rush, it blossoms. In this story, fortune doesn't always come from ambition or strategy. Sometimes it grows from a vase on your dining table, a corner in your living room, a flower by your window that opens not just to the sun, but to your future. In Feng Shui, flowers are not just ornaments. They are energetic signatures, natural amplifiers of qi that quietly recalibrate the vibration of your space. And their influence goes far beyond aesthetic. The right flower arrangement placed in the right location can attract more than compliments. It can attract connection. It can elevate clarity. It can activate prosperity and even stir love out of its hiding place. These are not mere traditions. They are energetic blueprints that generations have trusted, not just because they're beautiful, but because they work. Imagine walking into a room that holds a single orchid in bloom. The air feels different. Time slows down. Something about its posture, elegant, effortless, reminds your nervous system that grace exists even on ordinary days. Now imagine placing that orchid in your bedroom, intentionally, in the southwest corner where love and partnership reside. Over time, you notice conversations soften, tension lessens, a deeper calm settles between you and those you share space with. That's not a coincidence. That's Feng Shui in full bloom. This is not about superstition. This is about understanding how your home speaks and how flowers can help it say what your spirit has been trying to call in. Each flower holds a frequency, not metaphorically, but vibrationally. Their shape, scent, and even color hold messages that the energy of your home responds to. And when those messages align with your intention, whether that's love, focus, peace, or success, the result is not just beauty, it's shift, it's magnetism, it's quiet transformation. Just as clutter drains your focus, the right floral placement can recalibrate your momentum. Stuck finances? There's a flower for that. A relationship that's lost its rhythm? There's a placement for that. A mind clouded by indecision or mental fatigue? Yes, even that has a botanical ally. In this episode, we'll explore 5 powerful flowers that do far more than decorate. They protect, they inspire, they attract the very energies you've been trying to manifest in silence. And best of all, they do it gently. No effort, no hustle, just presence. Because luck in Feng Shui isn't forced. It's invited, it's tended to. It's planted like a seed and given the right atmosphere to rise. And flowers, real, living flowers, have always been the messengers that signal when something in your life is ready to shift. You'll discover which flowers are best for financial momentum, which ones unlock creative flow, and which arrangements breathe new energy into your romantic life. We'll also cover placement tips that align with the Bagua map, so you're not just adding color, you're adding direction. This is Feng Shui, but it's also emotional design. It's life design. So if you've been feeling stuck in any area of your life, the solution might already be blooming. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is watering a flower that's about to change their entire vibration. That someone could be you. And before we begin, I'd love for you to help this energy grow. If this channel speaks to something deeper in you, if you feel connected to the wisdom we share here at New Day Mindfulness, I gently ask you to support this journey. A like, a share, and a subscription go further than you think. With your help, we're one step closer to reaching our first 2,000 followers, a milestone that will allow us to continue producing grounded, sacred, and powerful content just like this for those who need it most. So take a breath, look around your space, then ask yourself, what is blooming here? What could be blooming next? Let's begin. The energetic language of flowers in Feng Shui. In Feng Shui, flowers are not passive decor. They are dynamic, living expressions of Earth's frequency, organic transmitters of vibration that shift the emotional and energetic signature of a room the moment they arrive. Unlike static objects, flowers breathe. They move subtly with airflow. They change shape as they bloom and fade. And they possess scent, color, and symmetry that interact directly with the chi of your space. Every element of a flower, the shape of its petals, the richness or softness of its hue, the speed at which it opens, and the fragrance it emits, sends a silent but distinct message to your environment and, by extension, to your subconscious mind. This isn't simply metaphorical. Studies in environmental psychology already suggest that the presence of fresh flowers can elevate mood, improve cognitive clarity, and reduce anxiety. Feng Shui goes further, teaching that the energetic structure of flowers harmonizes the yin and yang qualities in a space, restores flow where energy has stagnated, and anchors intention into physical form. Each flower operates like a tuning fork. When chosen consciously, it amplifies a specific frequency you want more of in your life, whether that be romantic affection, spiritual clarity, family harmony, or professional recognition. In this way, flowers serve as energetic activators. Their presence can enhance specific sectors of the Bagua map: the southwest for love, the east for health, the southeast for wealth, the south for fame, and so on. Their ability to shift the energetic tone of these zones isn't superstition, it's strategy, because energy responds to beauty, and beauty, when charged with intention, becomes function. The 5 flowers we'll explore in this video weren't chosen randomly, nor just for their beauty. They have long histories tied to the virtues we actively seek: longevity, abundance, inner peace, renewal, and devotion. These blooms show up not just in gardens, but in rituals, artwork, temples, and folklore because they carry archetypal energy. They are physical embodiments of energies we try to manifest in our own lives. When we place them in our homes with awareness, they don't simply brighten the space, they calibrate it. And perhaps most importantly, flowers remind us of impermanence. They teach that beauty is a rhythm, that growth comes in cycles, and that timing matters. In Feng Shui, this understanding is essential. Flowers must be real, fresh, and alive. Artificial flowers, no matter how convincing, do not hold the same chi. They do not breathe. They do not change. They do not die. And because of that, they cannot communicate with your space in the same way. Real flowers, like real change, carry vulnerability and power in equal measure. In the sections that follow, we'll explore 5 specific blooms that hold potent energy when placed with intention. Each flower is a messenger. Each one says something different to your space. And depending on what you need, healing, romance, recognition, grounding, they may say what you've been waiting to hear. Flower number 1, yellow camellia, elegant wealth and moral integrity. Among the flowers honored in Feng Shui for their power to shift energetic flow, the yellow camellia holds a rare and refined space. Its energy is not flamboyant nor fleeting. It doesn't shout for attention like more dramatic blooms. Instead, it carries itself with a quiet elegance, drawing the eye through softness rather than spectacle. With its concentric, layered petals and shades ranging from golden butter to pale sunlight, the yellow camellia is a visual metaphor for inner balance, ethical success, and prosperity that doesn't come at the cost of peace. It speaks to a kind of wealth that is both cultivated and clean, free from desperation, aggression, or unethical compromise. That distinction is at the heart of why the yellow camellia is so powerful in Feng Shui. Unlike other money flowers, which amplify boldness or draw fortune through external movement, the camellia activates wealth through alignment. It supports a vibration where self-respect and abundance grow in the same soil. Its presence is a declaration that what is earned with integrity not only lasts longer, but carries more joy, more meaning, and more freedom. Energetically, the yellow camellia carries both earth and wood qualities. The earth element shows up in its color, which is closely associated with the center of the Bagua map, Tai Chi, the domain of health, inner harmony, and overall life balance. The Tai Chi sector is often overlooked, yet it governs how well all other life areas function. Placing a yellow camellia in the central zone of the home strengthens this core. It acts like a gravitational anchor for your chi field. From this center point, wealth can flow more smoothly, relationships become more grounded, and the mind stabilizes. The plant does not work by pushing energy out, but by harmonizing the space around it. It nourishes, it absorbs static, it holds presence. In Feng Shui, this kind of stabilizing force is invaluable, especially in homes where energy tends to rise too quickly or scatter between too many priorities. Just as the center of the Bagua holds the rest together, the yellow camellia supports the coherence of your life path. The camellia's wood element shows through in its slow, sturdy growth and upright posture. It brings qualities of expansion and nourishment, but not the rapid, vine-like movement of other floral species. Instead, it grows with dignity. This makes it particularly resonant in the southeast sector of the home, the zone associated with wealth, financial flow, and self-generated abundance. A yellow camellia in this area doesn't call in windfall money or risky ventures. It supports consistent income, investments that mature, and growth that feels deeply earned. It holds energy like a wise accountant rather than a gambler. This makes it especially effective for people seeking to build stable businesses, generate long-term savings, or cultivate financial independence that is rooted in calm self-worth rather than pressure or ego. When placed in a ceramic or clay pot, materials that further reinforce the earth element, the camellia becomes even more grounded. It then serves not just as a wealth activator, but as a reminder. To grow slowly is not to grow weakly, it is to grow well. The yellow camellia also carries moral symbolism that sets it apart from many other decorative blooms. In ancient China, it was often given to scholars, government officials, and spiritual teachers, not simply to honor them, but to reflect the ideals they were meant to embody: honor, discipline, and clarity. To this day, the yellow camellia is used in some temples and ancestral rituals as a floral offering not for its fragrance or size, but for its symbolism. In Feng Shui, this heritage makes it a powerful tool not just for attracting wealth, but for maintaining ethical alignment while pursuing that wealth. In a world where success is often chased at the cost of well-being, this flower sends a very different message. It affirms that money and virtue are not enemies, that ambition and character can coexist, and that true prosperity begins with respect, both for oneself and for the process. In terms of pairing, yellow camellias work exceptionally well with citrine stones. Citrine, often called the merchant stone, radiates solar energy and is used to amplify confidence, clarity, and prosperity. When placed at the base of a camellia's pot, or even arranged in a small dish nearby, the citrine stone acts as a conduit, enhancing the flower's vibrational influence. This pairing is particularly helpful in office settings, study areas, or entryways where financial energy is being focused or protected. The combination creates a triad of forces: the flower representing cultivated virtue, the crystal representing solar clarity, and the space itself acting as a field where these qualities multiply. Over time, this setup can reshape how you relate to money, not as something to chase, but something to welcome, honor, and use wisely. Another energetic support is intentional color symmetry. Surrounding the yellow camellia with soft earth tones, beige, warm white, muted terracotta, reinforces the earth element. If placed near glass or metal, which are dominant in many modern homes, this color balancing helps temper harsh frequencies, creating a more nurturing atmosphere. Yellow camellias also benefit from consistent care routines. They do not respond well to neglect or inconsistency, not just physically, but energetically. If they are forgotten, they fade quickly, not just in form, but in function. Their energy contracts. But when cared for, gently watered, pruned with presence, and spoken to with gratitude, they thrive and the energy around them responds in kind. This is one of the flower's deeper lessons. Prosperity is not passive, it's nurtured. And what you tend to, tends to you. It is important to avoid dried camellias or artificial versions. In Feng Shui, dried flowers represent trapped or declining qi. While they may look elegant, they hold no life force and can actually interrupt the flow of abundance. The yellow camellia's power lies in its bloom, the softness of its petals, the quality of its movement, and the qi it releases as it opens to the space. Real, live, blooming flowers are always preferred. If the flower begins to wither, replace it promptly, not just for aesthetic reasons, but to signal to your space that you remain in alignment with fresh, vibrant energy. Keeping dead or decaying camellias signals stagnation. And in the wealth sector, that stagnation can affect how easily resources find and stay with you. Psychologically, the yellow camellia also supports a refined state of self-worth. Its energy encourages you to act from a place of calm authority, to choose quality over quantity, and to define success on your own terms. In mindfulness-based Feng Shui, we refer to this as inner wealth vibration, the frequency you carry when you know you are enough, and that what you attract is an extension of your wholeness, not a substitute for it. The yellow camellia stabilizes this belief. It becomes, over time, a visual affirmation of earned abundance. In conclusion, the yellow camellia is a flower of quiet power. It does not promise quick rewards or chaotic luck. Instead, it brings dignified prosperity, rooted moral clarity, and energetic coherence to the areas of your life that matter most. Placed with intention, it becomes a living symbol, not just of what you want, but of who you are when you are aligned. And when paired with the right elements, sunlight, earth-based pots, citrine stones, and a moment of daily care, it creates an environment where wealth doesn't just visit, it stays. Flower number 2, peony, the empress of love and fame. Among all flowers revered in Feng Shui for their potent energetic influence, the peony stands as the undisputed empress. Revered for centuries in Chinese culture and prized across Eastern traditions, the peony's lush, ruffled blooms represent not only romantic beauty, but the full flourishing of a life well lived. This is not a modest flower nor a fleeting decoration. Its wide-open, voluminous form speaks of abundance, of status, of legacy, and, most importantly, of love in its most powerful magnetic expression. In traditional symbolism, the peony isn't merely associated with courtship or flirtation. It's tied to noble love, enduring marriages, and the kind of sensual elegance that doesn't fade but deepens with time. In Feng Shui, peonies are used to elevate the romance energy of a space, but their benefits go beyond the emotional. They also influence how one is perceived in the world, making them a favorite in both Southwest Bagua placements, the sector related to love in marriage, and in entryways where first impressions are formed and fame energy can be enhanced. The energetic impact of the peony comes from more than just its visual appeal. It holds both yin and yang qualities. Yin in its softness, fragrance, and receptivity, yang in its bold color, expansive bloom, and commanding presence. This balance makes it uniquely suited for spaces that require both magnetism and gentleness. The southwest corner of the home, ruled by earth energy and connected to love, partnership, and maternal strength, responds especially well to peonies. When fresh, healthy peonies are placed here, whether in a bouquet or potted form, they activate relationship chi, draw in romantic attention, and help soothe tensions between partners. In fact, for couples navigating distance, emotional disconnection, or stagnation, the regular placement of peonies in this zone has been used as a gentle, energetic bridge, helping rekindle affection and invite tenderness back into the relationship. For singles, it serves as an energetic beacon, sending the signal not only that love is welcome, but that the space is emotionally ready to receive it. Historically, the peony has also been deeply linked to elevated social status. In classical Chinese art, the flower was often painted on silk scrolls, robes, and room dividers in aristocratic homes, not purely for decoration, but as an intentional energetic invocation. The presence of peonies was said to attract not only romance, but the right kind of romance, partnerships that were both emotionally rich and socially advantageous. This belief became so embedded in culture that many brides were adorned with peony imagery on their wedding robes to symbolize a union blessed with fertility and prestige. In Feng Shui application today, that cultural imprint remains strong. The peony is still considered a floral ally for those seeking not just love, but high-quality connection. Relationships that elevate, not drain, that inspire, not distract. The color of the peony plays a vital role in directing its energy. Red peonies, being the most vibrant and yang in energy, are powerful activators of passion, recognition, and sexual vitality. They are best suited for couples looking to reignite desire or individuals hoping to step into a more charismatic, confident version of themselves. Pink peonies, on the other hand, are more nurturing in energy. They encourage sweetness, emotional safety, and romantic softness. For newlyweds or those seeking heart-centered courtship, pink varieties are ideal. Coral peonies balance the two, offering a harmonious blend of sensuality and tenderness, especially useful in shared spaces where multiple types of energy must coexist, such as master bedrooms or couples' offices. The peony also offers energetic support in more public aspects of life. Placed near the front entryway of a home or studio, it functions as a kind of energetic invitation, signaling that this is a space of elegance, beauty, and refined magnetism. In Feng Shui, the entryway is considered the mouth of qi, the point where energy first enters the home. A well-placed peony arrangement in this area subtly elevates how others perceive the space and, by extension, the person who occupies it. For entrepreneurs, designers, public speakers, or anyone whose reputation plays a role in their success, this kind of floral enhancement can influence outcomes in surprisingly practical ways. Just as certain perfumes create immediate emotional impressions, peonies radiate a vibrational aura that combines visual grace with symbolic authority. This quality is not just theoretical. In a 2019 interview, renowned designer and entrepreneur Vera Wang revealed that she keeps fresh peonies in her creative workspace year-round. She referred to them as her lucky flower for vision and elegance, explaining that the presence of peonies helped her maintain both inspiration and focus in high-pressure environments. What's especially notable here is that Wang doesn't attribute their power to mysticism, but to a deeper emotional resonance. She believes that beauty invites beauty, that when your surroundings hold grace, your mind moves more gracefully too. This aligns directly with Feng Shui's philosophy, that the environment doesn't merely reflect your inner state, it shapes it. Energetically speaking, peonies are not plants to be placed casually. Their power is best activated when they are offered with intention, cut with care, arranged with thoughtfulness, and positioned in clean, uncluttered zones. They benefit greatly from supportive pairing. Rose quartz, for instance, when placed beside a vase of pink or coral peonies, amplifies love chi and emotional healing. Red candles nearby strengthen passion energy, while a mirrored tray beneath the bouquet can double the impact by symbolically multiplying romance energy in the space. Placement in ceramic or stone vases, particularly in colors that support the earth element, such as ivory, light terracotta, or muted gold, further harmonizes the flower's impact with the elemental balance of the room. Peonies, like all live flowers in Feng Shui, should never be allowed to decay in place. Their beauty is powerful, but their wilt is symbolic. Dead or withering peonies should be removed promptly, not just to maintain aesthetic, but to avoid stagnation in love energy. Keeping expired blooms in your relationship zone can reflect unresolved emotional pain or unspoken resentment. When discarded with gratitude and replaced with fresh flowers, you send a message to your space and to your unconscious that you are continuously open to renewal, beauty, and emotional evolution. This flow matters. In Feng Shui, movement is everything. The peony teaches that love, like qi, must breathe to stay alive. One advanced ritual involves placing a fresh red or pink peony in a vase beside a love letter written not to another person, but to yourself. This letter, folded and placed beneath the vase or tucked inside a ceramic base, becomes a subtle energetic signature. It programs the flower's field with your own declaration of self-worth, self-compassion, and readiness to receive love without compromise. Over time, this ritual can rewire not only how you attract partners, but how you experience the existing relationships in your life, with more warmth, more sovereignty, and more grace. Ultimately, the peony is more than a flower. It is an energetic archetype. In it, we see the divine feminine in full bloom, soft but strong, open but discerning, radiant but grounded. When you place a peony in your home, you are not just decorating. You are inviting in the essence of romantic fulfillment, personal prestige, and magnetism that does not demand attention but naturally draws it. It's a declaration that you are ready to be loved with reverence, to be seen with clarity, and to rise beautifully unapologetically into your full presence. Flower number 3, lotus, the pure heart of the home. Few flowers in the world carry the spiritual gravitas of the lotus. Its meaning transcends culture, time, and geography, yet in nearly every ancient spiritual tradition where it appears, from early Buddhist sutras to Hindu Vedic scriptures, it represents a universal truth that something pure can emerge from the depths of darkness and still remain untouched. The lotus blooms in murky, stagnant waters, yet its petals rise pristinely above the surface, unstained by the mud from which it grows. That paradox, growth through adversity, purity born of challenge, is precisely why this flower holds such a commanding presence in both sacred art and practical Feng Shui applications. It is not a symbol of perfection, but of perseverance, not of escape, but of transcendence. And in modern homes where emotional tension, mental clutter, or spiritual fatigue quietly accumulate, the lotus is an energetic medicine. It gently recalibrates the space, returning it to stillness, spiritual alignment, and internal grace. In Feng Shui, the lotus is associated with the water element and harmonizes beautifully in spaces connected to reflection, transition, and inner development. It is most commonly placed in the north sector of the home or workspace, an area connected to career, life path, and personal evolution. This placement allows the lotus to serve as a compass for direction not just in work, but in the broader context of life's purpose. When integrated into the zone, the lotus supports clarity of vision and reduces the kind of energetic turbulence that often clouds judgment or delays decision-making. It helps align outer ambitions with inner truth, reminding the occupant not only of what they want to achieve, but of why it matters. The lotus doesn't energize like red flowers do, nor does it circulate qi like wind chimes. Instead, it offers serenity. Its power lies in presence, And in homes where chaos or overstimulation are constant companions, this presence becomes a balm for the nervous system. Because growing live lotus indoors is rare and often impractical, Feng Shui practitioners frequently work with symbolic representations of the flower instead. This could be in the form of a carved wooden lotus placed gently atop a meditation altar, a water bowl containing a fresh or silk lotus bloom near a sacred space, or framed lotus artwork in hallways or wellness corners. What matters most is the integrity of the image. It should depict the lotus in full or near bloom, and it should evoke stillness, openness, and light. Avoid harsh colors or overly stylized versions that feel more decorative than devotional. The lotus is not a trend, it is a teacher. In homes where meditation is practiced, even casually, placing a lotus image behind or beside the sitting area creates a subtle energetic field that reinforces focus and invites spiritual insight. The north placement supports life path clarity, but in spiritual corners of the home, the lotus becomes something even more intimate, a mirror for the soul's evolution. There is also a graceful power in placing a lotus image near the front door. This is a less commonly known technique, but incredibly effective for those seeking to shift the energy that first enters their space. In Feng Shui, the entryway determines what type of qi enters your life. By placing a lotus near this threshold, you're subtly signaling to the universe that only clean, graceful, purposeful energy is welcome. Visitors often report feeling calm the moment they cross such a threshold without knowing exactly why. That's the nature of the lotus. It works beneath the surface, just like the waters it rises from. It doesn't need to be the centerpiece of the room to be felt. A small carving near a shoe rack, a floating silk lotus in a water bowl beside the front mat, or even a lotus motif on a subtle wall hanging can be enough to change the emotional tone of the entire home. Psychologically, the lotus has a profound impact on those experiencing grief, uncertainty, or spiritual exhaustion. Its image alone often triggers a sense of hope, renewal, and patience. Just as the flower takes time to rise from muddy water, so too do human beings move through emotional depth before clarity emerges. In Feng Shui terms, the lotus serves as a stabilizer for emotional qi. When placed in bedrooms, especially near the head of the bed or in the area opposite the footboard, it can help reduce mental overactivity and support more restorative sleep. In therapy rooms, yoga studios, or journaling corners, it enhances the flow of introspection while reducing inner judgment. And in homes where loss has recently been experienced, whether through a breakup, a movie, a death, or a professional setback, the lotus becomes an emblem of recovery. It tells the space and its inhabitants that light returns, that there is no shame in murkiness, only opportunity for eventual grace. Color matters too. In Buddhist teachings, the white lotus is associated with spiritual purity and transcendent wisdom. The pink lotus with the historical Buddha himself and ultimate enlightenment. The blue lotus with intellectual growth and mastery over the senses. And the red lotus with love and compassion. In Feng Shui, pink and white are most commonly used for home altars or meditation areas, while blue is excellent for the north sector if mental clarity is the intention. Red is best in family-oriented spaces or in therapy rooms, where healing relational wounds is a focus. Silk lotus representations should be kept clean and free of dust. Even symbolic flowers must retain their dignity. They are not passive images, they are vibrational agents. Treating them with care maintains their energy field. One of the most impactful lotus rituals is called the bowl of reflection. It involves placing a ceramic or glass bowl of clean water in a calm area of the home, ideally in the north or near a window with gentle morning light. In the water, a silk lotus bloom is floated, along with a few drops of rose or sandalwood essential oil. Once a week, during a quiet moment, one sits beside the bowl and reflects on what part of their life feels muddy, A single word or phrase is written on a small piece of paper and placed under the bowl. The ritual doesn't involve fixing the issue or forcing answers. It involves witnessing. Over time, this act builds a meditative rhythm in the home, and the lotus becomes an ally in internal purification. Ultimately, the lotus is more than a Feng Shui suggestion. It is a living metaphor for those navigating spiritual growth, career transition, emotional healing, or simply a desire for deeper stillness. The lotus holds space. It doesn't rush you toward goals, nor does it demand outward success. It reminds you that what is beautiful does not need to be perfect, that what is whole does not need to be loud. That transformation, real transformation, is slow, sacred, and unseen until it blooms. Flower number 4, yellow chrysanthemum, vitality, longevity, and mental strength. The yellow chrysanthemum is a flower of clarity. Its bright sun-shaped face, often found in radiant tones of gold, amber, or saffron, radiates a steady, mature energy that feels less like an emotional wave and more like intellectual sunlight. Where roses speak to the heart and peonies stir desire, chrysanthemums stimulate the mind. In classical Chinese philosophy, the chrysanthemum has long been linked with autumn, the season of reflection, structure, and the quiet consolidation of wisdom after summer's chaos. This symbolic connection is not incidental. Autumn is the time when energy begins to descend, when nature withdraws to conserve, and when humans, too, are called to think more carefully about what is lasting, what is nourishing, and what requires letting go. In that seasonal archetype, the chrysanthemum thrives. It doesn't wilt in the face of cooling air or fading light. Instead, it unfolds. Its petals, densely layered and reaching outward in a radial burst, seem to hold the sun's memory even as the days grow shorter. This quality, stability amid transition, is exactly why yellow chrysanthemums are prized in Feng Shui for reinforcing longevity, mental resilience, and balanced vitality within the home. Energetically, yellow chrysanthemums embody both the earth and metal elements, depending on their placement and shade. The earth aspect comes from their yellow hue and strong form, earthy, grounded, unmoving. This makes them excellent stabilizers in areas of the home where qi tends to scatter or weaken. The metal element is more symbolic, connected to the flower's precision and its association with mental energy, clarity, focus, discipline. In Feng Shui theory, these qualities make the yellow chrysanthemum ideal for supporting the East sector, which governs family health, vitality, and ancestral connection, as well as the Northwest, the sector linked to mentors, helpful people, and structured leadership. A vase of fresh yellow chrysanthemums placed in the east area of a home reinforces physical vitality, encourages regular health routines, and subtly strengthens the emotional bonds between family members. It's not a dramatic influence, but a consistent one. It fosters patient endurance, the kind of energy that doesn't burn bright and vanish, but sustains like a warm hearth. In homes with elderly residents, yellow chrysanthemums carry a particularly meaningful resonance. Their association with longevity is not only symbolic, it's emotionally stabilizing. When placed in living rooms, shared spaces, or beside ancestral altars, these flowers serve as gentle affirmations of ongoing life force, strength, and value at every age. They also radiate a calming vibration that can ease agitation, reduce restlessness, and support mental clarity. Particularly for elders navigating cognitive decline or emotional fatigue. Unlike more vibrant, high-frequency flowers that can overstimulate sensitive individuals, the chrysanthemum offers a kind of grounded brilliance. It's sunny, but not sharp. It's vivid, but not jarring. Its energy feels wise, deliberate, and wholly present. This makes it one of the few flowers equally well-suited to youth and age. For students, writers, researchers, and professionals whose work depends on consistent mental performance, the yellow chrysanthemum can be an energetic asset when placed in a personal study or office. When arranged in the northwest corner of the space, a Bagua sector associated with helpful people, mentorship, and clarity of thought, the flower functions as a support structure for discernment, decision-making, and sustained attention. Its energy helps anchor the mind during long periods of analysis or planning. In an era defined by digital distraction, the chrysanthemum's frequency acts like a soft boundary, shielding the workspace from mental scatter while subtly enhancing inner discipline. It's a flower that says, stay focused, stay steady, think clearly. For those preparing for exams, building long-term projects, or carrying the mental load of caregiving or leadership, that kind of energy is not only useful, it's sacred. Beyond its immediate environmental effect, the chrysanthemum also holds a place of honor in the cultural and philosophical traditions of East Asia. In Japan, the imperial seal is a chrysanthemum. The Festival of Happiness celebrates it annually, and the flower is revered not just as a national symbol, but as an emblem of noble thought. In Chinese Taoist texts, chrysanthemums are praised for their ability to thrive in harsh climates without complaint, symbolizing emotional independence and inner composure. In both cultures, the yellow chrysanthemum became known as the flower of the ninth moon, reflecting its association with the double ninth festival, a time for honoring ancestors and elders. These deep cultural connections add weight to its energetic presence in modern Feng Shui. When you bring a yellow chrysanthemum into your home, you are not simply decorating. You are aligning with a lineage of spiritual integrity and reverence for wisdom. Chrysanthemums also offer one of the clearest distinctions in Feng Shui between emotional and mental energy. Where many flowers, such as roses, orchids, or tulips, operate on the emotional spectrum, inviting love, healing wounds, stirring memory, the chrysanthemum works on the mind. It helps clarify what is known versus what is assumed. It reduces emotional reactivity. It organizes thought. This makes it a particularly effective flower in conflict resolution zones, such as the dining room, family room, or even counseling spaces within the home. Placing a yellow chrysanthemum in these areas can help foster more grounded conversations, reduce impulsive outbursts, and promote dialogue that values both logic and compassion. For parents of teenagers, couples navigating decision-making, or roommates managing shared responsibilities, this flower provides a subtle vibrational cue that says, let's think before we react. To maximize its Feng Shui effect, chrysanthemums should be placed in earth-tone ceramic vases or paired with natural stones such as tiger's eye for clarity and courage, fluorite for focus, or hematite for grounding. These combinations enhance the flower's stabilizing properties and create an energy field conducive to mindful presence. Avoid plastic vases or artificial colors, which can interfere with the natural frequency of the flower. The chrysanthemum thrives on authenticity, and this includes the integrity of its container and surroundings. In terms of care, chrysanthemums are relatively low maintenance, but they must be respected. Their petals are delicate and should be kept clean and free of dust or decay. Wilting blossoms should be trimmed immediately, not just for aesthetics, but to maintain energetic flow. A neglected chrysanthemum quickly shifts from a beacon of clarity to a symbol of neglected thought. In this way, the flower teaches the discipline of follow-through. It's not enough to bring clarity into your space. You must also sustain it. That is its deeper lesson. That mental strength is not a burst of brilliance, but a practice, a daily tending. One subtle but impactful ritual involves placing a single yellow chrysanthemum in a bowl of clean water in the east sector of the home on Sunday mornings. This simple act, performed with intention, serves as a weekly reset for the family's energy. As the water reflects light and the flower opens over the day, The space absorbs the frequency of new beginnings, clear focus, and soft joy. This ritual is especially powerful in households recovering from illness, emotional discord, or periods of mental overwhelm. Over time, it becomes a touchstone, a visual and energetic reminder that health is a rhythm, not a destination. Ultimately, the yellow chrysanthemum is a flower of continuity. It doesn't just brighten a room, it stabilizes it. It doesn't just decorate, it educates. Its presence reminds us that intelligence is a form of protection, that wisdom is a kind of wealth, and that clarity, when practiced consistently, becomes confidence. In Feng Shui, we seek balance not only through beauty, but through energy that works with us, not against us. And the yellow chrysanthemum does just that. It's not a flower that demands transformation. It offers steadiness in the midst of it. It supports you while you're becoming. Flower number 5, white or yellow orchid, harmonizer of energy and social success. The orchid is not a flower that demands attention. It commands it in silence. Among all the blossoms used in Feng Shui, the white or yellow orchid occupies a singular space, one of elegant restraint, energetic balance, and interior refinement. Its form, characterized by a graceful symmetry and subtle, almost architectural structure, immediately sets a tone of serenity in any room. It doesn't compete with other elements. It calibrates them, and it is this ability to subtly harmonize, to gently elevate, to infuse a space with quiet dignity that makes the orchid a powerful ally in shaping the emotional and social tone of the home. In Feng Shui, white and yellow orchids are most revered for their stabilizing properties and their association with refined good fortune. Unlike other lucky plants that attract abundance with bold colors or vigorous growth, the orchid represents fortune that is earned and sustained through self-cultivation, aesthetic clarity, and a balanced approach to success. This is not the fast, chaotic rise of luck that arrives overnight and vanishes by morning. It is the enduring, graceful luck that accompanies emotional maturity, social intelligence, and a deeply anchored sense of self-worth. The orchid teaches that wealth is not only what you receive, but how you hold it. And in a world filled with overstimulation and ambition, its stillness becomes a form of power. Orchids are especially effective when placed near natural light. A windowsill in the south sector of the home, the area associated with recognition, fame, and how the world sees you, enhances their energetic impact dramatically. When sunlight touches the petals of a white or yellow orchid in this location, the result is not just visual brightness, but vibrational clarity. The South Bagua sector is governed by the fire element, and while orchids themselves are not fiery in temperament, their elegance subtly amplifies the best aspects of fire: visibility, inspiration, charisma. In this way, the orchid becomes a social activator, helping the resident be more seen, more respected, and more at ease in positions of visibility or leadership. But unlike bold red flowers, which can sometimes overstimulate or bring volatility to fire-heavy spaces, the orchid balances that flame with grace. It encourages thoughtful attention over showmanship and genuine recognition over performance. In professional spaces or in the homes of creatives, coaches, public figures, or hosts, orchids in the south window can become silent partners in building reputation, not through noise, but through nuance. Equally potent is the orchid's influence in the West Bagua area, creativity and children. Here, the softness and gentle lines of the orchid speak directly to emotional openness and imaginative flow. For artists, writers, musicians, or anyone who works with ideas, placing an orchid in the west sector of the studio, office, or creative corner can unlock a deeper well of refinement and original thinking. It does not provide inspiration like a spark. It provides it like a stream, steady, clear, and refined. The West is also associated with metal Mao energy, which governs precision, communication, and joy. Orchids, with their sculptural form and emotional calmness, reinforce these themes perfectly. In homes with children or adolescents navigating emotional turbulence, an orchid in the West can help ease reactivity, soften tension, and restore a sense of order without rigidity. What distinguishes the orchid energetically from more emotive flowers is its neutrality. It does not carry the heavy romance of the peony, nor the direct passion of a rose. Instead, it supports the middle path, emotional equilibrium, aesthetic resonance, and the kind of wealth that is often invisible to the eye, but unmistakable in its presence. Its very structure reflects this idea. Every orchid petal, no matter how unique its species, grows in mirrored balance. This visual harmony subtly trains the energy of a room to align with balance and proportion. Spaces that are emotionally chaotic or visually cluttered respond immediately to the calming presence of orchids. They create psychic white space. They allow breath. This makes them ideal not only for individual homes, but for shared or transitional spaces such as entryways, hotel lobbies, boutique studios, and therapy rooms. Wherever energy tends to gather and shift unpredictably, the orchid stabilizes. This capacity to stabilize and beautify simultaneously is precisely why so many interior designers, especially those attuned to both luxury and emotion, view orchids as essential. Kelly Wearstler, one of the most influential names in modern design, has publicly spoken about her deep reliance on orchids when completing high-profile spaces. In a 2019 feature for Architectural Digest, she stated, "They speak to the soul of a room. They balance what the walls cannot." That sentiment echoes a key principle in Feng Shui, that energy is not only built through architecture or color schemes, but through the living, breathing presence of nature in its most refined forms. The orchid, in this context, is more than a plant. It is an energetic punctuation mark. It completes the sentence the room is trying to say. In emotional terms, orchids have a quiet way of reducing volatility. Their vibration is not just calm, it is calming. In rooms where arguments tend to happen, or where creative tension runs high, the orchid absorbs and disperses sharp qi before it can build into conflict. Unlike larger plants that command attention or absorb negativity like sponges, the orchid diffuses. It disperses tension by shifting attention gently outward. In homes where personalities are strong or interpersonal dynamics are complex, this subtle redistribution of emotional energy can be the difference between overwhelm and flow. For this reason, Feng Shui masters often recommend orchids for families going through transitions, professionals facing burnout, or couples who need space for both beauty and breathing room in their shared environments. The emotional wisdom of the orchid also makes it a symbolic ally for those on journeys of healing, especially when self-worth has been challenged. Its energy teaches patience, presence, and the elegance of restraint. The white orchid in particular is aligned with spiritual purity and renewal, making it suitable for altars, bath sanctuaries, or bedside tables where restoration and reflection are the focus. The yellow orchid, with its gentle solar hue, brings a slightly more energizing quality, ideal for rooms where joy and confidence are being rebuilt. Together, these two tones offer a dual approach: peace and empowerment, calm and charisma. Orchids should always be placed in clean, respectful containers, ceramic or glass preferred. Their roots are sensitive to overwatering and neglect, and in Feng Shui, this physical trait mirrors a deeper truth, that refinement requires attention. Beauty must be honored, not just displayed. To allow an orchid to wither through inattention sends a subtle message to your home's energy field that elegance is not sustainable, or that beauty is not a priority. This undermines not only the aesthetic, but also the energetic structure of the space. By contrast, an orchid that is tended to, rotated toward the light, and spoken to with quiet appreciation becomes a living altar. Its bloom becomes a statement, not just of luck, but of self-respect. One particularly meaningful ritual is the centering orchid practice. Once a week, ideally during the transition between work and rest, the orchid is misted gently with water, while a short affirmation is spoken aloud. Something like, "I release the noise of the world and return to the rhythm of beauty and clarity." This act, when repeated regularly, helps anchor the home's emotional field. Over time, the orchid becomes not just a plant, but a cue for emotional recentering, especially valuable in high-pressure or overstimulated environments. Ultimately, the white or yellow orchid is a feng shui treasure, not because it demands results, but because it evokes resonance. Its presence is the embodiment of refined prosperity, not the kind that screams for attention, but the kind that lasts because it is built on balance. It supports social success not through ego, but through elegance. It harmonizes spaces not by removing their individuality, but by helping each element find its rightful place. In this way, the orchid reminds us that power does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and when placed with intention, care, and reverence, that whisper becomes a vibration that transforms the entire emotional architecture of the home. What to avoid when using flowers in Feng Shui? In the art of Feng Shui, flowers are not static ornaments, but living agents of intention. They anchor energy, translate emotion, and modulate the subtle frequencies of a space. But as with any energetic tool, their effectiveness depends not only on what is added, but on what is avoided. Misused, neglected, or unconsciously placed flowers can disrupt the flow of qi as easily as they can elevate it. The key lies not only in selection, but in sensitivity. Understanding that flowers, by their very nature, communicate silently with their surroundings. And when that conversation is cluttered, blocked, or ignored, the message becomes fragmented. That's when the energy of a space begins to feel confused, static, or even heavy. So while flowers offer powerful harmonizing potential, they must be engaged with as part of a living system, not merely decorative placeholders. To truly benefit from their presence, one must know what to avoid. The first and perhaps most common misstep is overcluttering with too many floral types, especially in spaces already rich with pattern, color, or visual complexity. In Feng Shui, harmony relies on coherence. When 5 different flower varieties in clashing shades and competing vase shapes are placed together in a single area, the result is not beauty, but chaos. The energy becomes restless. Instead of amplifying a single intention, such as clarity, romance, or joy, the space begins to hold competing vibrations. Orchids may signal restraint, while peonies pull in passion, chrysanthemums reinforce focus, and roses activate emotional vulnerability. When all of these voices speak at once, the room becomes energetically indecisive. This doesn't mean one must limit themselves to a single flower throughout the home, but rather that each floral zone should be treated with intentional simplicity. Let one energy speak per space. Let the room breathe between messages. And above all, let color palettes harmonize. A carefully curated combination of pink roses and white orchids may support a heart-centered space beautifully. But introducing red tulips, orange lilies, and neon blue hydrangeas to the same arrangement not only disrupts the flow, it confuses the very frequency you are trying to cultivate. Another key guideline involves the shape and placement of vases. While the flower carries the energetic signature, the container either enhances or undermines that signal. Sharp-edged vases, particularly those with square corners or aggressive pointed features, introduce harshness into the energy field. These angular forms are often associated with sha qi, disruptive or attacking energy, and can weaken the softness and receptivity that most floral energies are meant to generate. Rounded or gently curved vases, especially those in neutral, earth-tone ceramics or clear glass, support the natural flow of flower qi and avoid energetic conflict. Equally important is avoiding placing flowers directly beneath overhead beams, especially those made of exposed wood or metal. Beams symbolize energetic pressure, and their weight compresses the qi underneath them. A flower placed under such a structure may struggle to hold its vibrancy, and more importantly, the energy it's meant to radiate becomes blocked. In Feng Shui, beams are best either softened with upward light, masked with fabric, or kept clear of floral arrangements altogether. Perhaps the most subtle yet consequential mistake is allowing flowers to rot, wither, or dry out unnoticed. While it may seem harmless to let a bouquet linger a day or two past its prime, from an energetic standpoint, the consequences are real. In Feng Shui, decaying matter symbolizes decline. It holds stagnant or reversed qi. A fresh flower is an amplifier of life. A dying flower is a visual and energetic symbol of what is being neglected, forgotten, or released. When these are left in corners, entryways, or relationship zones, they send a quiet message to the space that attention has faded, that presence has been lost, or that what once thrived is no longer being nourished. This is especially important in areas tied to partnerships, health, or reputation. A vase of yellowing orchids in the south sector may unconsciously erode confidence. Wilted peonies in the southwest corner can quietly influence the emotional tone of a romantic relationship. The solution is not perfection, but presence. When a flower begins to turn, notice it. Remove it with gratitude, and if appropriate, replace it with something that reflects the current energy you wish to hold. This act alone of caring enough to tend, to rotate, to respond, is a ritual of alignment in itself. One final practice that supports both beauty and balance is rotating flowers with the seasons and with your personal energy goals. In spring, when the energy of renewal and upward movement is dominant, peonies or tulips can reflect that freshness and emotional bloom. In summer, when fire energy is high and clarity is vital, the lotus or sunflower, symbolic of spiritual illumination, may serve better. In autumn, chrysanthemums support steadiness, gratitude, and reflection. And in winter, fewer but more refined flowers, such as orchids or even symbolic blooms in soft hues, may help hold the stillness of the season with grace. Aligning floral choices with the seasons is more than aesthetic. It's about remaining in dialogue with nature's rhythm and allowing your home's qi to evolve organically rather than stagnate through sameness. In truth, Feng Shui with flowers is not about strict rules. It's about resonance. And every misstep, whether it's a crowded bouquet, a forgotten wilt, or a vase with too many angles, can be corrected with awareness. The key is to treat flowers not as static decorations, but as living partners in the cultivation of harmony. They respond to your attention. They echo your inner landscape. And when chosen, placed, and maintained with intention, they become some of the most powerful energetic tools available. Not because they are loud, but because they are alive. Final. And so we return to the quiet power that's been blooming beside us all along. In Feng Shui, a flower is never just a flower. It is an energy signature. A living, breathing affirmation placed into your space with care, carrying meaning that goes far beyond color or form. Each of these 5 floral allies, the noble peony, the centered lotus, the sunlit chrysanthemum, the dignified camellia, and the elegant orchid, offers not only beauty but frequency, not just softness, but structure. They are reminders that we don't need to chase luck, force wealth, or grasp at clarity. We can grow it. We can place it. We can shape it gently bloom by bloom, intention by intention. You don't need a mansion, rare plants, or a perfectly aligned bagua map to invite better energy into your life. You need presence, you need awareness, and most of all, you need heart. Because in Feng Shui, the most powerful activator of all is not gold coins or lucky charms. It's your willingness to tend to the subtle, to notice where the air feels heavy and ask, what would it take to lighten this? To place a flower not because it matches your curtains, but because its energy matches your vision for the life you're building. It's in that moment, when beauty and meaning align, that transformation begins. Each of these flowers holds more than fragrance or beauty. It holds a vibration, an invitation, to love with more intention, to live with more clarity, to succeed without stress, to create without depletion. They are not magic. They are mirrors. They reflect your energy back to you, amplified, clarified, and softened where it needs to be. So perhaps the real question is this: is your home filled with flowers or with fortune? If this video helped you see Feng Shui flowers in a new light, if it stirred something within you, an inspiration, a memory, a longing for more harmony, I invite you to stay connected. Please consider giving this video a like, a share, or a comment below. Which of these 5 floral guardians will you welcome into your space, and why? Your story may inspire someone else on their path. And if you'd like to support the continued growth of this channel, New Day Mindfulness, I warmly encourage you to subscribe. Your support helps me reach our next milestone of 2,000 followers and allows me to keep creating deeper, richer, and more meaningful content for you. Together, let's plant beauty with purpose and let our lives bloom from the inside out.